The point of this video is just to, I wanted to share my experiences with upper cervical and NUCCA chiropractic because, in short, I wasted about 6 months of my time, probably close to, $5,000 to $7,000 or so, and I ended up in a much worse place than where I began. And so I don't want the same to happen to other people. Once again, this isn't to demonize this particular modality, but it certainly isn't for everybody, and it certainly isn't as non-invasive as it's marketed to be. So I think that's, I think my story could potentially help some people find, other means of helping themselves as opposed to going in something that isn't really scientifically proven and will probably leave you in a much worse place than you would begin. I'm also going to take a little bit of time to review my experience with Dr. Glass in particular. He is a upper cervical practitioner in New York City who advertises pretty aggressively on YouTube, and that's exactly how I found him. And I had an absolutely devastating experience with him, and it was, extraordinarily traumatic and something that I'm still dealing with today, to be quite honest. So I will dedicate part of this video to reviewing my experience with him, particularly since if you were to just look at his Google reviews, it looks like everyone seems to have a stellar experience, but it's not really representative of some of the consequences that you could potentially experience if you choose to use him as your practitioner. I've had a number of issues with brain fog and different cognitive issues over the years, due to either oxidative stress, inflammation, vitamin deficiency, stress, anxiety, etc. And one of the avenues that I explored in order to remedy myself of this issue was potentially, treating my atlas subluxation. So if you Google atlas subluxation, you'll see that there's like a host of symptoms that could be attributed to it, or it could be mapped back to an atlas subluxation. And basically what it means is that your one of your C vertebrae is out of alignment, and therefore your life energy isn't really flowing to your brain properly, and it causes a lot of biomechanical issues such as having uneven hips, as a result uneven shoulders, etc. In addition to that, I have flat feet, and then on top of that I've had a few ankle injuries. So I at least on paper I looked like a textbook case for atlas subluxation. So it seemed at the time to be the silver bullet for me. And I'll go into eventually what I learned down the line. But that's originally why I started out, was to relieve myself of brain fog, and additionally hopefully help some of the biomechanical issues I was having, such as pains on the left side of my pelvis, left knee, etc., and then also kind of the uneven shoulders and tendency to have a bad posture. So if you go to Dr. Glass or to pretty much any upper cervical practitioner or NUCCA practitioner, you'll kind of do the same thing. You'll do a preliminary examination. Some are more in depth than others. You'll probably go get an X-ray, and then they'll basically 9 out of 10 times probably tell you have an atlas subluxation. It's sort of like having Epstein-Barr virus. Most people have it and aren't perfectly symmetric, and then they'll go on to probably try and sell you a package of some sort that usually costs a few $1,000s at least, depending on where you're located, and they'll probably want to lock you into a treatment plan of approximately 3 to 5 months, and that's kind of how it'll begin. As far as the treatment is concerned, so you'll go in the first time, and they'll sometimes there'll be some a inauguration, if you will, or orientation, and after that you'll go on a bench, and they'll perform NUCCA, which is just a pretty light, gentle force on the neck. You might hear some Rice Krispies grinding sound, you might not, and then they'll measure your shoulder height again. They'll measure your leg length and all of that. And then you'll see results instantly, or perceived results. And then as far as just what the first day or the first couple of treatments actually felt like, so at least for me, I felt almost like this sensation going down my spine, as if it was reacting to it being manipulated. I had different pains like going up and down my back. For the range of the day, quite frankly, it was something like I'd never experienced before, and it was, honestly quite comfortable, quite uncomfortable. So it was just, I went to the treatment, then I went back to work, and I just had, pains all up and down my spine, and it would just move around, kind of like a chameleon. It wasn't too sharp of a pain, but it was definitely a discomfort because it was not something particularly natural for my body. So if you spend any time researching atlas subluxation online, you'll find out that there's, a number of different styles, and NUCCA is probably the most popular one. And then there's upper cervical, quantum spinal mechanics, Blair method, all sorts of stuff. And at least in my experience, so Dr. Glass kind of falls into the upper cervical, kind of quant Blair, non-traditional NUCCA. He's also not a member of the American NUCCA Association. So that's something important to note, which I didn't figure out till later. And additionally, so I would say the main difference is that just the tools that are available to them. So to me, NUCCA just feels much more scientific. So basically with NUCCA, you'll do the typical leg length tests, and you'll also kind of check your shoulders and all that. But they use an instrument in order to check the height of your shoulders as well as your weight distribution. So it just seems a lot more sophisticated in that regard. With upper cervical, and in particular with upper Glass, Dr. Glass, he would, adjust you and, put you on a scale and just stand behind you and look just to see if your shoulders had moved or, if they were the same height or anything like that. So just really not as methodical in my opinion. And I'll go into detail as far as how I got better, and NUCCA played a role in that, although it wasn't, certainly wasn't the silver bullet, but it kind of helped a little bit. So what I felt after my first session, basically it was pretty awful. I just had pains that would move all across my back, and mind you, I don't have a history of back pain whatsoever. Maybe occasionally on my lower back and on the left side of my pelvis. However, once I did upper cervical with Dr. Glass for the first time, I had a fair amount of pain that would just kind of go, move from different sides of my back and then up my neck and just all over the place. And it was just this dull ache that moved all over my spine, partly because I think, perhaps my body wasn't used to being manipulated in that way. So it was absolutely nothing like going to a regular chiropractor at all. It just has nothing to do with it, even though it was pretty gentle and you seemed to use little force. The kind of the consequences on your body are just pretty profound, to be quite honest. So it's something to be aware of, and most practitioners seem to be aware of this, and they'll usually tell you that you should expect to get worse than to get better. Don't believe that. That's a bunch of nonsense. There's not really any modality that expects you to get worse and better, at least not significantly worse. I think that's a crock of bullshit, in my opinion. So just be wary of that. And if you are uncomfortable for a pretty long period of time, I would advise you to run to the hills and try and get your money back, and hopefully do some damage control, because it's not going well if that's the case. So after about probably several weeks to a month after starting with Dr. Glass, my symptoms got significantly worse. I had pain all over my neck. I couldn't even had zero inflection in my neck, so I couldn't do any of that. I'm still very careful when I do that, but I couldn't move my neck whatsoever. This left side of my neck was completely stiff. It was pretty abysmal, and I obviously alerted him, and the only solution that he had for me was really to adjust me some more. And I found this to be a complete act of hubris after your treatment clearly makes me worse on a consistent basis. It was pretty appalling that all that could be done was just to, do more adjustments without revisiting the x-rays or doing new imaging or anything like that. So yeah, that was pretty much how Dr. Glass handled it in my case. Just terrible brain fog. I couldn't work for 6 weeks in any meaningful capacity anyways, so I was basically taking some degree of PTO, which obviously was difficult on top of the thousands of dollars that I was paying for the treatment. So it was it really backfired on me. So after being with Dr. Glass for about 3 to 4 months, I called it quits. I think he kind of figured out as well that there was not a lot he could do for me. He was reasonably nice. However, I don't think that there was a whole lot of empathy on his end. I would have expected to get some money back, but I cut my losses and I had to go somewhere else because I simply wasn't going to pay someone to hurt me. So it just didn't really make a lot of sense for obvious reasons. And I wasn't really seeing a whole lot of effort on his end to rectify the issue, apart from just offering more of the same thing that was hurting me. So we cut ties probably about 4 months in, and I was left with a neck that could barely move. I was extraordinarily anxious about it. I had several instances in which I moved my neck just towards my shoulder, and it cracked, and I lost feeling in my left arm, and obviously alerted him of that too. And the only response I got was go to the hospital now. So just not a whole lot of accountability on his end, to be quite frank. It was pretty much go fend for yourself sort of thing. So after that, I didn't really want anyone touching my neck for a while, and eventually I figured that the only way to correct this was to go to someone else that could do this. And so I eventually went to a NUCCA practitioner, and you could message me or leave a comment if you want to know who I went to exactly. But he was more of a traditional NUCCA practitioner and was just a lot more methodical in his approach, and it just resonated a little bit better with me. And as soon as I went to him, he did some imaging, and he basically said that it looks like you got into a car crash. It looks like this looks like the neck of someone who has whiplash. And it certainly felt that way. It was extraordinarily stiff, especially on my right side, and there was almost zero inflection in my neck, and there was a lot of muscle guarding and all that, so it was really quite awful. And so I spent 3 months working with him, and he was just generally less aggressive in his approach. And after a few months, it did start to improve a little bit as far as the mobility in my neck and just overall feeling. My neck didn't feel like a hinge, and I actually had movement in my neck, and I had less brain fog, and I was kind of returning to a pretty normal state. I will say that I was just left very traumatized by the entire experience. I was, really concerned when my loved ones hugged me, and because they would maybe hurt my neck, and it's still something that bothers me a little bit to this day. So, but it did get better, and then after 3 months, I didn't really see substantial results with him, but enough that I think I should probably move on and try alternative methods. And so after 3 months with this practitioner, I cut off ties and basically said I'm just gonna come in if I need it, because it costs $500 a month, and I wasn't seeing really dramatic results. So I decided to seek alternative methods and wanted to live a life post chiropractic. So how did I get better? It was a long journey. I mean, there was a couple things I was combating there. There was, a lot of biomechanical issues. I mentioned earlier that I have flat feet. There's, the forward head posture, and then of course the very stiff neck, trapezius, scalenus muscles that were, really stiff as a result of the upper cervical chiropractic care. It pretty much rendered them, hard as bricks, pretty much. So what I ended up doing is actually I relied on YouTube, and I went to a channel called Motivational Doc. If you don't remember the channel name, just you can leave it in the comments, and I'll leave it in the description. But if you still don't see it, just ask me in the comments, and I'll respond. And additionally, so I think that's kind of how I got better. There's a lot of really helpful videos on there. I also went to an alignment therapist here in New York City, and she was extraordinarily helpful as far as doing a little bit of myofascial release and because a lot of that muscle guarding, it was really just about kind of getting this to open up and whatnot. And then she also helps me treat my alignment and my pain issues from the bottom up instead of just relying on a pretty invasive modality to put that moves around your cervical spine, which is not something you should really play around with. So I mainly relied on exercises, block exercises, to really try and strengthen my ankles and foundation in order to improve my posture from the bottom up in a way that didn't really put my body and mind at risk. And once again, if you need recommendations for an alignment therapist here in New York City, let me know. She's fantastic, so I would totally recommend her. And then since then, I've been doing the exercises on my own and occasionally going to some sports massages and myofascial release. And additionally, I also started doing foundational training and qigong exercises and just a lot of stuff to build your foundation and your postural muscles, sacral chakra, all that kind of stuff. So honestly, that's kind of what I would recommend for most people with postural issues or lower back pain, is to really start with kind of these more natural modalities that, quite frankly, require more work on your end. But you're really left in a much better spot because you are actually, in command of your body, supporting your body in a much more holistic way, and ultimately will probably be in better shape. And you don't need to fork over a ton of cash and, just pray that some guy doesn't mess up your neck. So I think that that's probably a good place for most people to start. Obviously, for some people, upper cervical chiropractic care is going to make sense. But I think for most people, especially with complaints of, just forward head posture and, rotated shoulders and uneven hips, I think there's a lot of stretches and exercises that could really help you out alongside with massage and really just releasing a lot of that muscular tension. So, but once again, if you need any tips or anything like that, just go ahead and leave it in the comments. And I'm doing this video to help others. So, if I'm of any help, I would love to share with you. Yeah, so that's it about my story with upper cervical chiropractic care. Long story short, I don't recommend this to basically anybody. In particular, my experience with Dr.Glass was pretty abysmal. So it's pretty difficult for me to put my stamp of approval on that, since it was probably one of the most traumatizing things I've ever gone through. Is to have my mind and body compromised for such a long period of time, and just having an unstable neck is just, quite frankly, very scary and alarming, and genuinely affects your everyday life. So I would really try these softer modalities and, exercises and more holistic methods before trying to do any of this, really hocus pocusy kind of stuff. So there's not a whole lot of science behind this, and despite what they say that it's non-invasive and gentle, the effects on your body are certainly not gentle. So just be really careful if you decide to go this route. And if you need any help or any resources or have any questions about my experience, feel free to leave those questions in the comments below. And I'd love to help everyone, because we all deserve to feel amazing. Have a great day.